Africa had its fair share of liberation wars. And I think if you look at the subcontinent, we can start with the situation in Kenya during the Mau Mau period. We also had the collapse of the two Portuguese colonies, huge colonies, Angola and Mozambique. We had the skirmishes in Nyasaland, and then Rhodesia, and of course Namibia. The total farmers killed in Kenya and the old Rhodesia, northern and southern Rhodesia, the two Portuguese colonies, and Namibia, are less than the farmers which we've lost since 1994, when peace should have arrived in this country.
In 1948, the nationalist government was voted into power by the white electorate in South Africa, and the battle lines were clearly drawn.
Policy is one which is called by an Afrikaans word apartheid.
In 1955, the ANC called upon people to gather in Kliptown to approve the Freedom Charter, a blueprint for a free, democratic and multiracial South Africa, in which all races will be treated equal. 1960, Sharpeville. A peaceful crowd that gathered to protest against the pass laws were shot at by police. 69 people died.
It is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks.
Nelson Mandela was 45 years old when he became prisoner number 466 of 1964. He would be in his early 70s when he would again be a free man. In 1976, the youth in Soweto protested against a forced education in Afrikaans.
I am now in a position to announce that Mr. Nelson Mandela will be released at the Victor Verster prison on Sunday, the 11th of February.
Nelson Mandela became South Africa's first black president.
Never and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another.
Make a note. In yet another farm murder, 3 people have been killed on a farm outside of the Free State town of Lindley. The whole family was wiped out when the father, mother, and their 2-year-old daughter were murdered.
The day you were born, God and the devil sit next to each other and they make a deal. And in this case, I think maybe they make a deal and God said, this is the day they're going to die. And the devil said, all right, let me put my hand also in this. I'm Wilna's sister, and Ati was my brother-in-law, and Wilmien was my little cousin.
What happened on that day?
They phoned to the branch there at Bethlehem, and I thought maybe it was my mom or dad or something. And when I was there in the room, they said, Susan, your whole sister's family was... They killed all 3 of them. And I thought to myself, maybe they got the wrong people. This couldn't be my family. It was the wrong people. Maybe they made a mistake. This is not our family. And then when I arrived home and I saw my mom and everyone was there, and then I realized this is my family.
Bokkie is the grandmother of Wilmien, or Wilmienkie as she was known. Bokkie, being Afrikaans not too comfortable speaking English, started to tell me what happened on that day.
Sy was Wilna. En sy was nou getroud moes met Attie. En toe het hulle moes nou na 7 jaar vir Wilmientjie. Die dag toe die man vir
There was a man who knocked on her door. He told her that her son-in-law, Attie, was murdered.
vermoor. Hulle het hom buite gekry.
They found Attie outside his house, lying in a pool of blood, but they could not find Wilna and Wilmien. And did Bokkie know where they were? And she didn't.
En ek maak my oë toe en ek steek my hand op en ek sê, Here, vaai my waar jy my wil hê.
And it was as if God told her to not go to the farm and go and see what's happened there. And then more people arrived, and she just knew this was not going to be good. They still had the blood on their clothes. In Bokkie's eyes, the blood on their clothes just told her everything, and it's like she didn't want to know this. They told her that they found Wilmientjie and they found Wilna inside the house. And she just looked up to the sky and she asked,
Hoe kon die Here?
She lost 3 people. I don't even know how you cope with that. I can't even begin to understand what it must feel like.
They shot it missed the first time at Attie, né? And then they took Wilna and Wilmien out of the bakkie, and here they struggled all around the house. Attie and them, the packages were all around here, they said. There was everywhere blood against the walls. And then they said they had a struggle, and Attie fell there. He could no longer struggle with them, he fell there. So the guy hit him over his head with a panga, and the other one with the knife, and the other one with the garden fork. And apparently, they said they found the garden fork through his neck.
Everything was fast. I ran around the house. When I came here, I saw Attie lying there with his head in front. His foot was here and his left foot was on the fence. The moment I saw Attie, I ran away. At that moment, my son was coming around the corner and he saw Attie also, and he was very shocked. He was very shocked.
I assume Wilna was standing on the steps. They were busy taking it in. They were just waiting for them to finish Attie off. So Wilmien ran here, and here was it full of blood, and Wilmien stepped into her father's blood, and she was running here all around.
When you said that they found blood on Wilmientjie's feet, I mean, that's one of the most horrible things I've ever heard.
Her father was everything in Wilmien's life. When I just think, there she goes to Attie, and Attie is no longer breathing. And she's standing there next to Attie. What is Wilmien thinking to herself? What happened now to my dad? What's the matter with my dad? Why did they hurt my dad? And now she heard her mom scream and yell and try to get loose to help them, and I couldn't even imagine what's going through her little head. And when somebody grab you, and where you going now? You're going away from your mom and dad. How are you going to scream? What do you think is going to happen to yourself? And they brought her to this little room, and he shoot her there, and they left her in a box because they found the box half full of blood. The blood was drying on her feet, so she must have lied with her head first in the box. Then they took Wilna from the front door, from the kitchen door. They took her into the room where they forced her to open the safe for them. There was Attie's firearms and a little bit of money. And then they said to Wilna she must sit on her knees, and they shot her through the head. And then they took Wilmien, and they took her out of the box, and then they threw her on Wilna, if she was an animal.
Bokkie told me that the massive support that she's getting from the community, white and black.
no hatred here. There's no, everybody just recognizes this murder as, you know, the horrible thing that it is. And people are coming up to her in the street and giving her hugs and holding her hand and say that they're thinking of her and praying for her. It's nice to see the community coming together like that. It's just a pity that you need something like this to get them to reach out. Dus hierin, daar's nog nie 'n grafsteen op nie. Is hulle almal in dieselfde graf? So dit is die man en die vrou en die klein babatjie. Hulle almal is hierso saam begrawe. Such a beautiful place here and so quiet. You almost can't begin to think that such a horrible crime can happen here. But it did. In a statement made by one of the 6 killers, he said, whenever they wanted money, they just asked Ati, and he would then go into the house and get money. He never went to town to go to the bank to go and draw money, and this is why they killed him. Ati suffered 151 puncture wounds, and his wife Wilna and his 2-year-old daughter Wilhelmine were executed. On that day, they stole 3,300 rands, and that roughly translates to $650. And it just shows you how senseless this murder was. What is even worse is that 3 of the 6 accused worked for Ati. They knew him personally.
We always talk about it, about how violent South Africa is. What exactly is the picture?
More than 2.1 million crimes processed by the court or by the police per year in their police statistics. If you take those statistics and you break it down, more than 700,000 of those crimes are contact crimes.
Let's just accept that we have a problem, especially as far as violent crimes are concerned. The current murder rate is at approximately 34.6 murders per 100,000. In real terms, that is just under 17,000 people murdered in the last financial year. We are at about 5 or 6 times the international average. The international average is at about 6.7 murders per 100,000. If you consider countries such as the United Kingdom, they stood at 2.3 per 100,000.
We have a messed up society in South Africa. A young man who is black, who lives in an informal settlement, in a ghetto, from a broken family, who is uneducated, unemployable, who has no hope in life, the chances of that young man becoming a murderer, a criminal, and all sorts of nasty things are much, much higher than a young man who is born into a white family, intact household, fairly wealthy. So if you were to ask between this young white and the young black, who is likely to become a criminal, the answer would most certainly be black.
So can we then say that the result of what society is today is partly because of apartheid, but also because of the way that the people were fighting against apartheid?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that apartheid played a huge role. It had a lasting legacy. But the end was that we had the conflicting groups, those who defended the apartheid system and those who fought against the apartheid system. And you had some of the most extreme forms of violence being perpetrated by both sides.
The government or the ANC has never really apologized to their own people for asking them to be violent. Is that the result of where we are today?
Well, I think that's a huge contributing factor. There's no doubt that the ANC, as part of the liberation struggle, organized local communities to resist almost as an internal structure of the ANC. And we've seen horrible things being done by people to other people in the same community. In the more traditional areas, the elders, the older people, were the people that were looked at in terms of leadership, authority, maintaining traditional justice. We see all of that changed completely in the more urban settings, in the 80s especially, where young people, young children, as young as 10, 11 and 12 years old, formed justice committees. And the people that they targeted were the older people. But if someone cried that a particular person was guilty of collaborating with a system, that person was summarily tried and sentenced, and the sentence often was being killed by the necklace method. And I mean, that was one of the most horrible scenes that you could encounter, where a person was tied up and a tire put across his neck, and then petrol poured over that person. There was set alight, and he was left to die burning, while these young children were dancing around this burning person. Absolutely unfeeling, absolutely unfeeling. So those children are grown-ups now.
We die violent deaths in South Africa in general. Why did we get to a point where it's okay to be this violent?
If you are born the child of unstable and violent parents, you carry in you a genetic predisposition to become angry and violent. That anger then has to find an outlet. And that outlet is to look at who was the original perpetrator. Why am I where I am? And then I will go to the perpetrator and I will take the perpetrator or the descendant or the descendant's descendant of the perpetrator. And when they see the shock, when they see the hopelessness, the vulnerability, it enrages them to a great degree, and they turn violent and sadistically violent and will torture and murder in the worst possible way.
So violence is inherently part of our country. It's part of thinking. If you've got people that has for years and years been indoctrinated, now you suddenly have a constitution and you've got a democracy. How do you tell that person stop with violence? It's not necessary anymore.
What about the person who was born after 1994, who is still violent, a black person? It's not about whether we are 17 years down the line of democracy. It's about whether we still have townships that make it possible for a violent human being to be developed. And I would argue that the townships are still there. They will continue to reproduce violent human beings.
South Africa comes out of this violent past, but in essence, we are still violent. Would you say that the farmer then, as a group, is under attack?
I have no doubt that this relatively small sector of the South African economy is under attack. And why I say this is that irrespective of the prominence which farmer tax has in South Africa, it is continuing. Violent crimes on farms are unique in the sense that there is a very little relationship between the violence used against the victims and the obvious motive for the crime. In many cases, a cell phone or a wallet is taken when the victim was subjected to the most gruesome physical maltreatment you can think of.
A black person attacking a white person, I don't think that this black criminal forgets that he is black and the victim is white. That whole conception of what being white represent will come and play itself out in the execution of the crime. That is what we need to understand, which is why if you look at the violence that they mete out against whites versus blacks, the violence meted out against whites is worse compared to what they do to their fellow black people. I have never been a criminal myself, but I suspect that they do stiffen their hand on the basis of the fact that they're not attacking one of their own.
Usually this torture goes on for hours because they feel safe in that group context, because the collective brain is working, and you feel safe because the farm is usually quite isolated.
Those who attack these farms would know, and they often do their homework properly before they carry out an attack. They would know that even if a panic button is pressed, that it would take 15 or 20 minutes before there's any response, which tells them that they have so much time to carry out whatever they intend doing.
It is estimated, compared to international figures, that we've got 700% more farm attacks in our country. It's extremely violent, our farm attacks. Much more violent than any other place in the world.
In rural areas, 1 out of every 8 farm attacks ends up in a murder. This is where this is to some extent different from the urban areas where the chances of being killed during a house robbery are far less than you would find on a farm.
The gorilla fights the war of the three, and his military enemy suffers the dog's disadvantages. Too much to defend, too small and agile an enemy to come to grips with. If the war continues long enough, the dog succumbs to the exhaustion and anemia without ever having found anything on which to close its jaws or to rake with its claws.
Johan Strydom was brutally murdered barely 6 weeks after his 40th birthday. He was attacked at his farm gate and then dragged behind his vehicle and left in a shed where he was later found by one of his friends.
When I get to these scenes, I sometimes struggle to understand what goes through the mind of a killer, of a murderer. I don't know exactly how far they dragged him, but according to the autopsy report, he died because of a burst liver. But there's something about being dragged behind a vehicle. I don't think that we can ever imagine what that would feel like.
You can't explain to anybody how brutal that was. You can see on his arms and everywhere that he actually stopped, and on his fists and things there was marks that showed that he actually put up a fight. His hands was open, his knuckles was open, and his face was totally like disfigured. So there was a huge fight here, and from there they actually pulled him behind his bakkie with a chain all the way back to the store where they actually left him.
Sorry, so when you say that he was pulled, they actually tied him to his vehicle?
Tied him to his ankle, to his own vehicle, and then they pulled him. For what reason, I mean, once again, I can just speculate. But if you look at the road and if you look at everything here, it's not an even road. I mean, 3 people against 1, pull him behind his bakkie with a chain. The autopsy said that he was still alive when he was pulled because there was a huge bump that burst his liver. And that was the fatal blow to end everything. I don't even think you can kill an animal like that. This is where the bakkie stopped, because over here was also blood. They dragged him from here to the storeroom, but they locked it as well. We grabbed another chain that was lying here and we actually chucked it behind the bakkie and then we ripped it open. At first I thought they actually tried to hang him up, because the way that it looked, he was lying in a crawling position but his head was that way. But yeah, this was where eventually my friend had his last day. But you go through stages. There was a time that I went out here and I just cried. And I was shouting, and the pain and the hatred that you feel at that moment is out of this world. I can't explain to you what went through my mind. You realize that he's gone, he's not here, it's there, he's dead. Okay, he's dead now. What's the next thing now? I must phone his family. I must phone his sister. What am I going to tell them? And I mean to phone them and to tell them, listen here, Johan's just murdered. And to hear them saying to you, no, you lie, because I can understand their pain.
I spoke to Sari Brits, Johan's sister, and she told me how death on its own is already bad. But for Johan to die in this way was very difficult for her to accept.
Dit is regtig moeilik.
She wonders what he thought when they attacked him at his gate. Did he have time to call for help? And was he still alive after they struck him the first time? Was he alive when they started to drag him behind his vehicle? It is these horrible questions that remains unanswered for Sari. One of the accused, when asked by the judge if Johan was still alive after they left him in the shed, answered that he knew he was because he could hear him breathing. In Sari's mind, her biggest torture is the fact that she knows that he was still alive when they tied him to his vehicle.
It is a weird feeling to be standing in a place where you know that somebody has been murdered. He was dragged in here, behind his vehicle, and he died because of that. And the question that still remains, was this hate? Is this one of those hate crimes that all the farmers are talking about? You come here, you see this, and it's difficult to argue with them. It's difficult to understand what else this can be except for a hate crime.
Two weeks before the murder of Johan Strydom, Jonathan Sikgole, who was only 21 years old, was accused of the attempted murder of another farmer in the area. He was released because of a lack of evidence. Jonathan was also charged with theft. He stole sheep from Johan, but Johan went to the police and he pulled back the case. And Jonathan repaid him by attacking him at his farm gate and dragging him behind a vehicle. Tying somebody to a bakkie, dragging him behind a bakkie, and that kills him. We try to explain these murders, yeah, but you've got to remember this, and society is rotten. It doesn't make it right, though. I mean, we explain it, right? So what's wrong here? What's wrong with this picture?
There's something wrong about the psychology of our society, and which is why you can't explain it. I wish I could. You can't explain it without tying it to history. But having explained it, it does not make it right, and this is where I agree with. It can never be right. I just can't imagine any rational human being approving of such carelessness. You really have to have your head checked if we're to justify that kind of a killing. I find it senseless myself, but it happens nonetheless, which the only thing we can try to do is to look at the conditions in which they live and how those conditions are contributing to that kind of behavior. That's the best we can do.
Compatriots, for some time now, areas around the northern borders of our country have experienced a spate of landmine explosion in which quite a number of racist farmers have either been killed or seriously injured. The ANC has long declared these areas war zones because the farmers in these areas have been fully integrated in the enemy's so-called defense and security network. They participate in Malan's so-called area defense system. Clearly, the enemy has also long regarded these areas as war zones.
During the 80s, farmers were seen as legitimate military targets, and Umkhonto we Sizwe soldiers, the military wing of the ANC, often attacked farms. Farmers had to look after their own security needs, and this was done by assisting the Defence Force in patrolling the farmlands. This system was known as the Commando system, and by the year 2000 had about 45,000 black and white members protecting the rural areas of South Africa.
What is important is an announcement that the commandos are to be closed down and the rural safety function were to be taken over by the South African Police Service.
When the announcement came in 2003, I think it was, that the commandos are to be closed down, the previous president, Thabo Mbeki, in his announcement mentioned that the police would put in place alternative structures to replace the commandos. I was in the police service at that time at National Head Office. I was responsible for rural safety. This came as a complete surprise to me and to all of us, because we were not prepared for this. We did not have an alternative in place at the time.
When he announced this, assured all of us that this transition would be a seamless transition, and that the vacancy caused by the closing down of the commandos would be occupied by a new structure within the police, and they referred to the new approach as the sector policing system.
We are in 2011. These alternatives were announced in 2003. In 2011, the police are still struggling to implement the alternative structures that was promised in 2003.
From my perspective, I would say without a shadow of a doubt that the state's ability to counter farm attacks were decreased, which resulted in a smaller capacity available to the agricultural community to take care of their safety and security.
What makes the disbandment of the commandos so senseless is that by the time that Thabo Mbeki announced that the commandos were to be disbanded, the situation on the ground was that 1,613 farmers have been murdered in more than 9,154 attacks.
I've spoken to a lot of farmers and people in cities as well, which believe that they're paying taxes, so it's the responsibility of the police and government to protect them, which is definitely so. That's how it should be. But it doesn't happen in South Africa. That's why the community must get involved in structures, and they must take responsibility for their own safety.
If 10 or what people attack you, what type of force must one person have to fend them off? So you must definitely do the proper training and do the necessary preparement to survive an attack like that.
I must say, there's a part of me that thinks, wow, isn't this a little bit excessive?
Well, if you've been to as many farm attacks as I have been, and walked over bodies of people, women crying over their husbands and children, husbands crying over their wives, it's definitely not excessive.
Is this just to sharpen reaction time, to sort of get to really feel what it feels like to be under fire?
The reason why we're on this course is to put you under stress, so that you know how to handle your weapon under stress. Because as soon as people start shooting on you, the stress levels in your body increases rapidly, and you must know how to handle that.
Geef me die pistool. Wat nou? Wat nou, Baron? Oh my God. What the fuck now?
I haven't got the luxury of 20 bodyguards. I must be my own bodyguard. And to do that, I must be able to defend myself properly. And I only can do that with the necessary training and constant exercise of that training. Look what happened there in Lundy with that 3-year-old daughter, what they killed there. I mean, if I have to fight for my family, I'll use every necessary force that's available to me.
I saw a little girl, one of the instructors took to the shooting range, and he taught her how to shoot this gun. And she, like the grown-ups, have to know what it is to feel the gun in your hand, to hear the noise, and to feel the power of that gun. Not to shoot somebody, But when she is in that situation and her mother and her father starts to shoot, that it is not an unknown scenario to her.
If you take the number of farmers killed and farms attacked versus attacks on police officers, it is a higher risk job to be a farmer in this country compared to be a policeman, an operational policeman.
And we already live in a very violent society, so therefore to be a policeman in this country is a very dangerous job.
It's a dangerous job, but it's a higher risk to be a farmer.
Walkerville dairy farmer Marie Veilbach, 79, was bashed into a coma by farm workers, who in turn were shot dead when they then ambushed her grandson Ian Viljoen on the 22nd of December with a shotgun and a steel pipe.
The people that went into the house and took a iron bar and battered my grandmother over the head, and from her head wounds she later died. And then after that they waited for me in the kitchen. When I walked here, I saw my one worker Martin sitting on the table, and a shot went off. That hit inside the door, so that was his shot from there. The door was open, and as that happened, I took a step back, and from about here, took out the gun and shot him in the head. As I shot him, another shot went off and went into the ceiling. He went down, came into the house. Praise God, the second worker came and tried to hit me with the baton. When that happened, I shot him also in the head. Both of them died instantly. You go into the house not knowing, is there more people? What's going to happen? Is there a third or fourth? I realized my grand must be in the house. Went through the hallway, and as I got here, I saw she was gorging in her own blood. It looks like they came from behind and hit her with the baton over her head, and she grabbed her head, and all her limbs were severed off. I took my phone and phoned the ambulance, the police and my mom, and told them what's the situation.
Think of an enraged, disenfranchised, angry young person who sees no hope for the future, and put him in the context of a very vulnerable person. And his anger will not only turn into violence, but sadistic violence, where he would aim to not only murder, but to dismember, torture, and kill in the most violent way.
We know, for example, that most of these crimes happen between people that know each other. For example, with murder, more than 80%, between 81 and 82% of murders happen between people that know each other.
I told my guys, listen, we work at a dairy, so I can't give all of you guys off Christmas and New Year. 50% is gonna work over New Year, and the other half over Christmas. Praise God. Told me, well, then he's gonna look for another job. He's not coming back. Said to me, listen, I want my money today. You don't wear armor, I'll come for you. I didn't think this guy's gonna come to kill me. So I said, okay, listen, from this moment, you are suspended.
Why did they do this to her?
I can't tell you. I won't do it, and I'm sure you won't do it also in your life, eh? But yeah, the money is a strange thing. It drives people to do strange things. It's sad that she had to die, because why didn't they just wait out in a shed or something? If hit me over the head and then take my bucky or what they can grab and go.
They were hitting her on her head with a metal pipe, so hard that the fingers came off, literally off the hand. Yeah. It was hanging by the
skin and
yes.
threads. Yeah.
So, and the reason for it was that there was a payment issue. They did get their money, but there was a bit of a payment issue, and there was also an issue around leave. Isn't that just normal? A normal person will have that in a normal job situation, but normal people don't go out and then kill and brutalize.
It's difficult to say this is the reason why they did it, but in the subculture of violence, The majority of young people, they unfortunately grow up in a situation where they have to fight for themselves at a very young age. So much so that we've developed the concept vicarious victimization. Now that means that you usurp the violence on other people and you make it yours, you internalize it, you make it your own. So this is why it's so important to realize that moral fabric of right and wrong, pity, in other words, to feel empathy for another person, is not installed at a very young age.
As a white person, I'm thinking black people are just violent people. Help me to understand that.
If you're white, you would think blacks are brutal against us whites. I can assure you, if you look at crime statistics and look at violent crime, you will find that actually blacks are the biggest chunk of people in South Africa who are victims of violent crime. Because once you throw color into it, it paints a picture of these blacks who are just mad and on a rampage to kill whites. And that actually cannot be supported by statistics.
An organized crime unit from Pietermaritzburg arrested 4 men for the murder of 3 people on Sherwood Farm on Wednesday, the 21st of July.
My dad phoned me up and told me that there was a fire on the farm, on this Sherwood farm. He had phoned my mum and said, bring more labour of the labour from this farm. Then he never heard, he tried to phone her back and didn't hear from her again. I told him to hurry up and go back to the house, and I immediately left afterwards because I had a bad feeling about it as well. He arrived here. My dad jumped out his truck and ran towards the door. As he ran round, he saw the garden boy lying dead to my left here. There was a trail of blood from the door here to where he died against the wall there. So he had his throat slit. The kitchen girl, the house girl, was lying dead just inside the kitchen. She had been shot in the back between the shoulders. So as my dad saw that, there was the garden boy's son, who was lying on the ground. He indicated to my dad to run. He knew the guys were still in the house behind. So my dad ran round that corner towards the other gate over there. During that time, he phoned me back to say everyone's dead, lying on the ground dead, and he needs help. Phoned the security company. They were pretty good. They phoned Mooi River and Nottingham Road Police. And during that time, I also phoned neighbours and said, bring guns, because we had no protection at all against these people. So my dad, he had come through here, and when I arrived, I came in immediately to this gate. I opened it. He ran to my bakkie and said, go, go, go.
So when you picked your dad up, what was going through your dad's mind?
He was just saying he doesn't know where my mother is and whether they've got her, whether they're raping her, whether they murdered her. He didn't see her when he arrived at the house, so he didn't know. It was a panic situation.
Suppose those 5 minutes were probably the longest 5 minutes of your life?
Yes, very much so. You feel total frustration, and yeah, we did not know what time they would arrive. When the neighbours arrived, we got some weapons and we came into the yard, and the police arrived pretty much at the same time. They were very quick. I went into the house with both myself and my dad, followed the policeman into the house, and we started searching for my mother.
What's going through your mind?
Panic. We were calling out and not getting any type of response. Even the kitchen girl's son that we found in the bathroom was in such a state of shock that he couldn't stand. So he couldn't answer us, he couldn't do anything. We didn't know whether maybe they had taken her away with them or whether they had murdered her or anything.
Where's your dad at this stage?
My dad had carried on searching the outside of the yard, and at which time I heard him crying, and it's another sound I'll never forget. And that's when he had found her lying at the foot of a tree. I couldn't see anything obvious at that stage, so I held her head and I said, and she was still warm, and I said, she's still all right, she's still all right. And at that time He pulled down her jersey and showed me that her throat had been slit, and that's enough to finish anyone off. Unlike the garden boy, who had bled a lot through struggling, there was a trail of blood from where he had been slit. There was no other evidence of my mum struggling.
Lorraine Clark was only 58 years old when she was murdered with her 2 farm workers on the 21st of July of 2010. And when I heard about this murder, the words of Dr. Johan Burger came back to me when he said that roughly 80% of murderers are known to the victims. And in this case, the person who slit Lorraine's throat was one of their farm workers.
Colin Mapulala, who was one of the main ones, his wife worked for us as well, and she absconded 2 days before the actual murder, so she knew something was up. We had actually found him fairly reliable, and then we promoted him to a tractor driver from a general labourer, and with the promotion he got very arrogant and started abusing his position, damaging the tractors, so my dad had demoted him back to general labourers and taken him off as a tractor driver.
Your dad had a dispute with him about driving a tractor, and now your mother is dead. There is something about society that is just really that horribly wrong that you can kill 3 people, because we're focusing here on your mother, but we must remember that 2 other people were killed in the same situation.
Yes, and I mean, my labourers are hurting just as badly as we are. They've lost their family members too. So it had nothing to do with racism or anything like that, as far as we can see. They just had no regard for life.
As a result of apartheid, a lot of black people were forced off their land, or they were never allowed to own land. And because of this, the government has decided to put rules in place. These laws are known as the government's land reform policy, and people could submit claims for restitution or to get their land back, or the other option was to get compensation for the land that they lost. But the problem is that the land transfer is happening so slowly that the people who want the land are growing tired of this, and the frustration that is caused is resulting in farm attacks.
If you look at KwaZulu-Natal, I think that we are one of the provinces that have got a large number of claims. We have both restitution claims, and the surveys that have been done indicate that basically KwaZulu-Natal is 100% under restitution claim. Then besides the restitution claims, we also have a situation where we have labour tenant claims. The labour tenant claims are anything between 11 and 15,000 labour tenant claims.
So is a labour tenant then somebody who's got right to the land but still does not have ownership of the land?
Absolutely, and as I said, that's where you start seeing a lot of conflict arising, because we're finding that in practice there are tenants that are expanding their livestock operations, for example, and they then need to graze their cattle on a larger portion of property. Now, where do they go to? Because once they've grazed in their area and they've now expanded their herd as well, often without agreement, many of the labour tenant claims have not yet been processed. So he believes he has a right and they want to exercise those rights. So it's an expected right that he has, but it has not yet been resolved, if I could use that term, through the process that it should have gone through. And when they have to wait for 10 or 12 or 13 years, how long do people wait before they start to exercise their feelings? There was a case that took place in the Weenan area. There was frustration between the claimants because they believed that they should own that property. They started to exercise rights that they believed they had, which basically meant invading areas of the property. And it led to 2 people being murdered on that farm. The first person was murdered on the Wednesday, and 2 days later the second person was murdered. And that weekend, everyone swooped in and the situation was resolved. We agree, we'll purchase, this is what's going to happen. time periods were shrunk down to literally a few days. Landowner received his money, claimants received their land, and everyone walked away. Why did it have to take 2 murders for that to happen?
We find that the producers of food are being killed, are being chased off the land, are being victimized. Therefore, I say there's a lack of will. The government is, from my perspective, they're not doing anything about this.
In an indirect way, government is responsible for the frustration, and maybe that is leading to farm attacks.
I think in an indirect way, yes. I think we may not have seen many of the farm attacks, some of the farm murders in this province, had government actually done what they should have done and been sincere in doing that.
Without land, we are nothing. Why would this South Africa belong to us when we have nothing to show that this South Africa belongs to us? The ANC must lead with the people.
We are often confronted by politicians about the land issue, saying that if the land issue is not addressed, we are going to see very angry people. I would like to respond in the same vein to say that if government is going to be confronted by hungry people, unable to access food, we are going to see a level of anger never experienced in this country before.
So even if you don't like the white farmer because of historical reasons, they provide food for the nation. Shouldn't we be a little bit more concerned about what's happening to them based on that?
I'm not sure if it is the role of white farmers is understood by the broader society. If you asked members of the black elite, I can tell you they will genuinely sympathize and they will understand why these white farmers are important in their lives. Because these black elites are materially well off. So they understand the link between them and their white counterparts. But you can't say the same about the poor blacks. They live in a social space that makes it impossible for them to appreciate anything positive that anybody can say. It could be a government, it could be a media company, it doesn't matter who you are. They think on the basis of their material conditions. And that is the biggest challenge.
There is no way you can be diplomatic about the issue of land. Willing buyer, willing seller has failed. We must find an alternative. You have not come with an alternative. We are giving you an alternative. We must take the land without payment.
Of all the land transferred to new owners under the Restitution of Land Rights Act, by its own admission, the Minister of Rural Development recently stated that more than 90% are unproductive. From being a net producer of sufficient food, a little bit more than a year ago, we became a net importer of food.
We have established that criminals kill farmers. Then we have land reform that is supposed to take place, but it's not. And there's a lot of frustration. And this frustration leads to farm attacks. And now we have Julius Malema, the ANC Youth League leader, who says that all whites are criminals, that they are going to take the land back without compensation, and that if the farmers give back 80% of their land, all farm attacks will stop.
The recent utterance by the president of the ANC Youth League, Mr. Malema, when he stated that if farmers are willing to give away 80% of their land, the farm attacks will stop. How can one explain that? That creates a direct link between land and the kind of violence we experience on farms.
When Julius Malema walks up to the microphone and says something revolting, something horrid, of the long list of things that he said, and 10 meters behind him, 5 meters behind him on the same stage sits the president of this country. He does nothing but smile. I don't know if it's apathy or fear, but doing nothing at that stage makes you an accomplice. It makes you guilty.
AfriForum's hate speech case against Julius Malema, the president of the ANC Youth League, started on the 12th of April for singing the song Dugule Ibunu. Loosely translated, it means shoot the boer, boer being the Afrikaans word for farmer.
There's other words in the song that a lot of people don't even mention. In the song, it is the following, if you translate it, it says, these dogs are raping. Who are they referring to? Mother, let me be. In other words, I'm not going to listen to authority. Mother, authority, let me be. Leave me alone. Let me do what I want to do. And another one is, these cowards are scared. I mean, these are all derogatory terms. Whatever the outcome of the court case, I've got a problem with the content of the song.
The banning of this song effectively says all revolutionary songs are banned. The songs that helped us to mobilize our people, the songs that helped us to agitate, the song that we used to send a message to our people. If you listen to them, they've got a war tone, all of them.
Shoot to kill, kill a man. Shoot to kill, Hamasa.
Right, put it in a museum, put it in a Freedom Park, in a video, and people can go there every year and sing it, no problem. But you cannot chant it, and it will, only if one person is influenced. It's one person too many.
Those who are prone to violence and prone to severe anger because they are totally disenfranchised with no hope for the future. They are young, they have dreams and hopes like any young person, will then take that literally and will go and do what the song says.
Here's the FRK. It's the collection of Afrikaans struggle songs. There is not one song in here that insults another nation. Not one. Certainly not one song that calls for the blood of other nations. I've gone through that 1,000 times to find out, are we ever insulting to our black brothers in this country? There's not one song like that.
People like Malema who are shouting, kill the farmer, making it seem all right to these young people to do exactly as he says. When you have your role model shouting things like that, well, that's what they feel is all right to do.
They have a huge story about if you call somebody the K, that word in the New South Africa. But isn't this the same? Isn't this unfair to the Afrikaner people when they sing that song? Because they get upset when they call them that, but how can we not get upset when they sing a song like this and the direct thing he's singing is happening to the South African Boere?
The K word was a word that meant ungodly. It was more a religious connotation to it, that we have, as white people, we have to come to Africa to come and save the Kafirs.
Yeah.
So that is part of our history, but we did give up that word, didn't we?
Yes, we did. May I just say that the K word is hate speech, not because we think so, because people who hear it and who are it don't want to hear it. That is how you determine hate speech, not the user of it. It's the one who's insulted by it who determines if it's hate speech. But the K word, we agreed we will not use because people are offended by it. Amazingly, that when I stand up and say, I am slightly offended when someone keeps singing, kill my tribe, then, of course, suddenly it needs a court case to be determined if it's hate speech. That court case shouldn't have been at all. That court case, in the absence of that court case, we needed a kind of people who stands up and says, excuse me, other South Africans have said something. You said what? You feel offended when we sing kill you? All right, all right. You don't use the K word, we won't sing kill you. We're not getting that, are we?
It is interesting to follow the timeline of what happened in the 10 days after Julius Malema sang the song Dibulu Bunu at the University of Johannesburg. On the 12th of March, Jan Wheeler was stabbed to death with a sharp object. He was 65 years old. 2 days later, on the 14th of March, Lynette Rafe was shot 3 times as she opened the door. She died on the scene. A day later, Albert van Deventer, when he went out to move the sprinkler, was shot in the face at close range. On the 19th of March 2010, AfriForum Youth attempts to deliver to ANC youth leader Julius Malema a name list of murdered farmers.
It was a memorandum stating why people are concerned about him singing, and then together with that there was attached the names of more than 1,600 people who were attacked on their farms in recent years. That's not an all-inclusive list of all of the people who've been attacked. That's only the names that we have. And eventually we couldn't even walk in because they were sort of barricading the entrance. And then we said, okay, well then we're just going to leave it on your floor so that we can say that we gave it to you. We sort of dropped it over their heads. They took the list and they literally threw it out into the streets. And as they were throwing it, sort of caught the wind, and a lot of the papers just went flying up in the air. It's sort of a political expression, but this was a literal case of them stepping on the names of the people who have been murdered. And that was one of the most shocking things I've seen in my life.
And then a day later, Koos van Staden was shot through the door of his bedroom while he was trying to protect his wife.
So die alleen, dit is die slag. En die mens verlang, so dit is die slagste. En jou hele lewe is daarmee. Dit voel vir jou so, dit voel vir jou, maar vir jou kinders onthou en jou vriende onthou, gaan 'n mens maar net weer aan. Jy moet maar.
South Africans are being murdered. This I understand. South Africans are being murdered at disproportionate rates. But I can also go to the subcultures and the sub-denominations, and there's my culture, the Afrikaner. I can also go to them and say, you know, if you're a banker and you work in a bank, you're a demographic. If all of a sudden bankers are wiped out disproportionately, I can go to bankers and say, is this what you are used to? When they are not used to that, there's a problem and it should be investigated. I'm telling you, I'm an Afrikaner. I don't care if other tribes don't care how many of their people are murdered. I care how many of my people are murdered. I happen to be a minority. It's very easy to get rid of my group because they're so small. Genocide for me is a very small amount of people to lose. If your nation is 5 people strong and I take 2 away, it is genocide. You can't tell me 2 is not genocide. In this case, 2 is genocide.
I made contact with Dr. Gregory Stanton, director of Genocide Watch. He is a world-renowned expert on genocide, and I wanted to get his opinion on what is happening to the farmers in South Africa. All right, let's talk about the 8 stages. That is something that you came up with. That is your genocide model.
The first stage is classification, in which you divide the world into us versus them. This second stage is symbolization. We give symbols to these classifications. And those two really occur in all cultures. The third stage, though, is really the place where genocide begins its downward spiral, and that's dehumanization. The fourth stage is organization, because genocide is a group crime. The fifth stage, which is polarization, is the stage in which you try to drive the society into an either-or kind of situation, in which you are either with us or you are against us. The sixth stage is preparation. Preparation is the stage at which you have inciting speeches being made by people who want genocide to happen in the country. The seventh stage, the actual extermination stage, is genocide. I mean, that's what's actually defined as genocide in the Genocide Convention. And then the final stage, the 8th stage, is denial. And denial can go on right from the beginning of the genocidal process all the way through to many, many years afterwards.
Let's bring it closer to home. Boer farmers have been upgraded from polarization to stage 6, and that is preparation. Why? I mean, is it really that serious?
I think it is. It wasn't because there was an upsurge in more murders, but during this last year, the president of the ANC Youth League, Julius Malema, began to go around singing this old revolutionary song, Shoot the Boer, and he also went to Zimbabwe and endorsed Robert Mugabe's land seizure methods. He is, I believe, a racist who will carry South Africa further down the road towards actual genocide.
The African National Congress youth leader, Julius Malema, is facing a possible genocide charge in the International Court of Justice in The Hague. An unidentified Rustenburg farmer laid the charge against the ANC youth leader. The lawyer, Fani van der Walt, representing the farmer, says the charges relate to Malema singing the anti-apartheid song Dibule Ebunu, or Shoot the Boer.
We have a political leader, namely Julius Malema, the leader of the ANC Youth League, inciting his followers to shoot the Boer with his song, and their own statute forms part of our legal system, clearly stipulates that incitement publicly and through the media constitutes genocide. Malema is not murdering anybody. He is asking his followers to murder those people, and he's succeeding. It's more dangerous to farm in South Africa than to fight in a war.
Julius Malema is singing that song. What is Jacob Zuma doing to give him a place on the list?
Jacob Zuma basically is doing nothing, and that is our problem. This is a crime in the media, and our government does not only see that the necessary prosecution and work is done, they just keep quiet, and it is our case that by just keeping quiet, they endorse this action. But a petition has been lodged to the United Nations, the Office of Prevention of Genocide, and we need their intervention urgently.
It does somehow become very difficult to think that farmers or the Boers, white farmers, are specifically targeted because they are white.
It's been our case from day one that this is not political. A group is targeted, and that group is called the farmers. It is so that the majority of commercial farmers in South Africa are whites. It is not whites that's targeted. I'm a white person, I'm not a farmer. I'm in the suburbs, and I'm not targeted. So this is not racial, this is against a certain group named the farmers.
I was very strongly opposed to apartheid and remain so. But what really, really bothers me is that I don't think that people, even if they have committed an injustice in the past, deserve to be the victims of future revenge injustice in the future. And what really worries me is that a lot of the politically correct human rights groups are just ignoring what's being done to the white farmers in South Africa.
The Wall of Remembrance was erected as a last honor to all the commercial farmers and their families who have been murdered since the 31st of May 1961, when South Africa became a republic. The custodians of this wall took it upon themselves to only put names on there that they could prove, because farm murders, farm attacks in South Africa is a hugely politically charged topic, and therefore they didn't want to be seen as putting false information out there.
We started from 1961 when South Africa became a republic. It's one place to show you feel for the people who left behind. But then you can also see in 94, the total start climbing. Why is there more farm murders now than there were since 1961? Most of them are old age. Why do you want to kill them? And for what?
Kia Meyer from Zeerst. He was living with his sister, which was 72. She was raped by two men, and he was severely beaten, very severely beaten. I went into the house to see if I could help, and there was just blood everywhere.
He wasn't shot, he wasn't stabbed, he was just beaten up?
Just beaten to death, basically, yes.
My brother was there, Boyce Pierre Jr. They just, three of them just got up and they just shot them.
Executed, yeah.
My father could never get our sons there.
And then the same thing happened to him.
This is my father, yeah.
Where he offloaded the labor.
Okay.
They just shot him there.
A little child of 3 years old, the Potgieter. These killings is absolutely appalling. It's a matter of getting rid of one ethnic group at the cost of another.
That was my oom. They shot him at his farm gate.
Van Zuidam.
Van Zuidam. They shot him there.
And that was your uncle?
That was my uncle. They shot him there, left him there. This is my cousin.
Van Zuidam.
Van Zuidam also is my cousin.
It's war.
Yeah, it is war.
And we can't do anything about it because it's a war from one side.
It is horrible.
Yes, it's a horrible story. They should take note about this and help us and do something, because the time for talking, there's no time for talking left. They're going to wipe the white people out.
And are you angry about this?
We're very, very angry.
My children has attended more funerals than weddings.
Wow.
That's true.
That's true.
The song, Shoot the Boer.
Of course, shoot the Boer. Who's the Boer? We're the Boer, you the Boer. Who else? And he carries on.
They want to get rid of us.
And still his party doesn't stop him.
As you put number 1,600 on paper, it's just a small number, 4-letter number. But if you look at all these walls, you see all the names. You think each one of that is a living person, a living farmer. So there's another food producer that's not there anymore.
This is for the farmers in South Africa who's been murdered. Just under 2,000 crosses now. Every cross has its own story. We want to tell it for the whole world, what symbolized this white crosses here. I started the Bita organization in 2002 and then started helping people. Sometimes it's just this little talk. That person can look all right for 1-2 years and then can something happen like this. And he's coming down again. So yeah, a shot, a next murder, it will put him through from the whole start from the beginning.
Lita, tell me, what makes you specifically qualified to do this?
I'm not a qualified person, Rian. I haven't got papers for that. I've got my papers 11 years back when my father, my mom and dad was being murdered. So my mom was shot 3 times and she died of blood loss. I took the kettle, boil the water, put it over her body. Yeah.
Why?
Can't tell you why. I asked them in jail and they can't answer that too for me. Maybe they're enjoying it. They didn't say they were sorry.
What did they do to your dad?
He was then 1, 2, 3 times shot. They strangled him in a bath, first put some ties on his neck, pull him up with the ties on the steps to the bedroom, backwards. That way our house was like it was a mess, only blood everywhere. And he opened the tap of the warm water, put the thing that you wash your hair with, put it in his mouth and opened the warm water. The post-mortem showed he was burned white inside. And yeah, the fourth shot, it was the shot who's blown the head away.
Lita told us just under 2,000 crosses are planted here on this mountain, and each cross represents another farmer that's been murdered. People come up here every now and again and they clean out the grass between the crosses and they paint it again, you know, just a little bit of upkeep. And then when they clear the grass, they use something like this. In South Africa, this is called a panga. This is the South African version of a machete. It is an easy, accessible murder weapon. What makes this more horrible, and just to put it a little bit more into context, is that Wilmien was hit over the head with a panga like this. And I suppose what happens is that when you hold a panga in your hand, you just, again, you can't understand why. Why would you attack a 2-year-old little baby with something like this?
One of the people supported by Lita is a farmer, Marietta Nel. She was shot at her farm gate with a shotgun, totally disfiguring her face 8 years ago.
Kyk, hy het hom hier teen my slaap gedruk en op daai oomblik het ek so gemaak en toe het hy hierdie weggeskiet.
So hy het jou probeer doodskiet?
Hy het my probeer want hy het die geweer hier gesit. Maar moet my nie vra hoekom nie, want niemand van ons weet nie, daar is nie iemand wat ek moeilikheid gehad het nie. Ek kan nie daai gevoel vir jou eintlik sê nie. Ek weet dit is verskriklik pyn, 'n vrees. Ek het nog 'n skoot verwag toe ek daar gelê het. Dis 'n angs wat by jou is, jy's magteloos, jy kan nie beweeg nie.
The Afrikaner, but more specifically the farmer, has sort of been beaten into submission. We are a very quiet group of people as well. It's like we feel guilty, and therefore we don't feel that we've got the right to actually stand up for our rights.
Yes, I think even that, even that beaten into submission thing is going to wear tired very soon. How guilty can you be when your elderlies are tied up to a gutter, when they are burnt with hot irons, when your wife is raped repeatedly while you are tied up to watch it, when your children are lifted up by their hair and shot through the head? That submission thing is going to unravel somewhere. That beaten into submission, that passive state you want the Afrikaner in, that's going to slip its moorings, man. And that ship's going to be a warship. We don't want that. We've been through that. I'm not Julius Malema. I don't get all happy when there's a revolution to be had. I have children. I've also had a revolution. I don't like it much. I don't want apartheid back. I don't see any black people who want back pre-colonial state of affairs amongst blacks. I want now. We have all fought for now, this incredibly beautiful country. The most beautiful thing about this beautiful country is its beautiful people.
The government needs to step up. They must immediately implement strategies. They must, you know, to say we're going to do research again or get a committee. There's a problem out there. Fix it. We are specialists. There's criminologists that can help, police officials, people at different organizations that can help. We're ready. Government must approach us. We can help to compile a preventative strategy or a safety strategy for farms. Although they say there's something in place, we don't see it.
At this time, at least, my own view is that the South African government doesn't want it to go anywhere further than it has gone. And that, in fact, you've got a multiracial police force and multiracial army and so forth who would stop anything going that far.
But what can happen is that there can be an outburst. So you can have 10, 20, 30, 40 farmers being killed off quickly in 1 or 2 days, and then the police will clamp down on that. We can react to it, but maybe we shouldn't react. Maybe we should be proactive.
I agree with that completely, by the way. And it's why I think our next big step in our anti-genocide campaign has got to be proactive education against genocide at the national and local level. In other words, to get it into the school systems of every school, every high school, every secondary school in the world, how this genocidal process develops, so that people will know when and how they should be upstanders, stand up against this kind of hatred.
Education is the only answer in my view. Take me, for example, if you want to be practical about it. I am a fairly educated black person. I have integrated with whites because I live in a historically white suburb. I can't be a criminal. I can't set out to go and kill my white neighbor. I see my white neighbor as a neighbor. Now, if you were to multiply me and have more blacks living like me, do you think there will be criminals and kill white people? Certainly not.
You need to invest in employment and in investment, especially from abroad. But you have to create conditions that would be inviting investment so that you can use that investment, both in terms of creating employment and rebuilding or building society, especially those sections of our society that suffers most. And that is mostly the informal settlements and other poorer communities. And you have to address those conditions through these investments and development that are conducive to crime. That, to me, is where we should start with the fight against crime.
We need to instill in the youth hope by first and foremost understanding them. Instead of requiring them to understand what they are doing and what the consequences are, we must first seek to understand them. Then we can require them to understand their place and position and responsibility in society. The empathic listener is the greatest deterrent to violence.
We are running in different directions. So farmers see themselves as an interest group. They must organize themselves and defend themselves. Black workers see themselves as a group. They are exploited by these bad people. And then you find people in government in unions who say this is happening because farmers are exploiting workers. So you have this situation where we are running in different directions. We are not a united nation that sees the problem as our collective problem. As a result, we are never going to fix the problem.
I think the best answer I've heard for this is that it's just not to be simplified. This is not the kind of problem with a single syllable answer, a yes or a no. Let's face the facts. Everybody is guilty. Everybody somewhere along the line was guilty of something. Maybe you didn't bring something to the party. Maybe you brought too much to the party. Firstly, we'll need that kind of honesty. At this stage, the people I miss at the party the most are the people in power. Secondly, we need the kind of debates we are having now, the ones we should have had 20 years ago. We need to have them now. We have to have them sooner than later, over a table. Not fighting, looking at each other and going, all right, I'm bringing this to the table. What are you bringing to the table? That's good old-fashioned ritual to get through something.
You know, my kids have never been brought up to see color. And yet now, after this incident, you know, they are certainly affected by this. It plays a lot on a little mind, and those kids are hurting, and they've missed their grandmother, and they know that it's a black man who murdered their grandmother. And they definitely take a different look. At night, they will not go out the house. I run a dairy farm where we start milking midnight, and we're milking most of the night. And I find it very difficult going to the dairy. It's, I've had to rely a lot on my managers. And I find I'm looking behind every corner. It really makes you fearful of the dark.
Got my wife, I got my kid. But what future has I got for that little one? I mean, he's 7 years old, and he's already seen somebody very close to him murdered. He saw the blood in his mom's hands. He saw the body. He doesn't see color, yes, like we did from the apartheid here. He doesn't see that. But the picture that's in his mind is almost the same.
Ek wil nie bly, ek sal hier doodgaan. Ek sal hier doodgaan. Hulle gaan my nie van my erfgrond afkry nie. Ek gaan nie vir hulle weghardloop nie. Die idee wat ek het sal my seker nog hier doodmaak. Maar ek gaan nie hier pad gee nie.
Weet jy, as jy vir iemand wil sê, jy's lief vir hom, sê dit. Moenie wag vir môre nie. It's too late. You must do it now.
Yeah, it doesn't look like Attie and Wilna's house anymore. Except the swing, nothing reminds me of Attie and Wilna anymore. The whole farm died. Everything is dead. It will always be difficult to come here and to walk through it and just imagine Attie lying there in the cold the whole night. And yeah, I think it will always be traumatic for anyone to come here. I can still remember Attie coming out of that garage with that bike and driving my children all the way down here. There to the, everywhere to the cattle. Does it, vir my does it vir my, daar ry hulle hier af. Maar die een skreef weer as die ander een, as hy alleen ry met die ander een. Hulle wil al twee saam gaan, want hulle is bang hulle mis iets.
You don't dream a good dream after this. You just have nightmares. Because you see your friend bleeding and standing, asking you to help him. That's all I dream, and that's what keeps me up at night. I mean, it's a year that's gone by, but that's the thing that you still see. You see that. You don't see the nice part. You don't see that.
The farmer was trying to crawl out of the shed, but he was already dead because they dragged him behind the bakkie. He held her head and he said to his dad, I think it's okay because she's still warm. But he then said, no, she's dead because you could see clearly that her throat was slit. He had 151 puncture wounds before he died. The little girl was 2 years and 10 months old, and she ran to her dad. And they found her footprints in his blood. And then they picked her up and they took her to a little room and they executed her. There was a box in that room and it was filled that much with her blood, of a 2-year-old blood.
What you've described to me was a journey through the worst kind of man's inhumanity to man. You now carry in you the scars of those who were killed, and those who were killed by the scars of the killers, and you weeping for them because you had to experience and work through something that is so far outside the realm of normal human experience that we cannot comprehend it. The hurt that you suffer is the accumulated hurt we need to address inside each of us, because there's no one in this whole country that has remained untouched by the scourge of inhumanity.
The day you were born, God and the devil sit next to each other and they make a deal. And in this case, I think maybe they make a deal and God said, this is the day they're going to die. And the devil said, all right, let me put my hand also in this. But I think the moment that you say, God help me, he's already there. The moment that they took Wilna, she started praying. She said, God, be with me, God help me. And I think the moment she said God was already with Attie and he was already with Wilmien, and he took her through the last minutes and he was with her.
Daar's 'n land en 'n volk in een taal gedoen, met gebede en beskryd en bloed gekoop, wat weer en weer van sy knie af moet streef. Ons sal dit oorleef. Uit die kake van oormag, deur die vuur op ons weg, staan die engele by ons vroue en die kinders wat sterf. Elke grafsteen een standbeeld vir die wat bly leef. Ons sal dit oorleef. My hart klop op tokkie waar hy breek vir my volk. Voor die kakie kanon of die krijger se dol. Dit maak nie meer saak nie waar ons begin. Ons sal dit oorleef. Ek lig my oor tot die berge op. Waar sal my hulp nog vandaan kan kom? Ag my God, jou woorde lê deur my gevier. Ons sal dit oorleef. Ek staan vandag op jou plaas, o vriend. Daaraan stop voor die stilte, so ver ek kan sien. Maar die geeste van gister sal môre herleef. Ons sal dit oorleef.